Yeah, welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name is Jennifer Turner, and I think most of you know that I am the director of the China Environment Forum that is now approaching 13 years old as a project here at the Wilson Center. We're one of 20 projects that try to bring the policy and scholarly communities together over our specific issue. And I have the best issue at the Wilson Center. I get to focus on China energy and environmental issues. And starting last year, I was able to really kind of ramp up my environmental work, energy work, because the Blue Moon Fund and Rockefeller Brother Fund and a USAID Vermont Law School grant just said, Jennifer, go do stuff on energy. And specifically for Blue Moon Fund, we have a project called Cooperative Competitors. Some of you have heard me talk about this. That there's been a lot of talk these days, right? That, China's going to eat our lunch in clean technology and we're falling behind and jobs are going there and, great gnashing of teeth. Well, in the Cooperative Competitors Initiative, through meetings, publication, and good old matchmaking, we're trying to really dig deeper into what are the real opportunities for U.S.-China cooperation on energy. And what does it mean? And today's meeting, as you saw the title, I've wanted to use the word King Coal forever as a title. So today we're going to decarbonize King Coal, because coal is king in the U.S. and China. And a lot these days, after the Copenhagen and the U.S. Congress wrestling with climate bill, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of good news on wrestling with the coal issue, CO2 emissions. But very quietly, there's been a lot of action between U.S. and China in the business sector. And one of the matchmakers behind this, there's an organization called Clean Air Task Force, and today we have Ming Sung, who he joined the Clean Air Task Force in 2008. He's their chief representative for Asia Pacific, and he's a man cut out of my cloth too. He's a matchmaker. But he's a matchmaker bringing together clean energy companies and institutions. And you have his bio, and you can see that this is the man meant to do this. He's got 30 years experience working with various, Shell, AspenTech, BASF, Monsanto, Department of Energy, and a lot of Chinese companies and organizations that he really knows the landscape and is working to bring them together. And I think at the Clean Air Task Force, I was joking with their folks, Jonathan. Where's Jonathan? Jonathan Lewis, about how when I first kind of found you guys, and it's like, you guys have been doing this work for a while, and I didn't know about it, which I was really kind of annoyed about. But now I found you. And first thing I did was made you guys come and talk. So Ming's going to be talking about some of the matchmaking work that they've been doing, and one of the, dare I say that, one of the people that have been match-made. Can you say that? Is that the right word? I have not enough caffeine yet to really do verbs correctly this morning. But we have Albert Lin, who's a board member and financial advisor of Future Fuels, and he's going to be talking specifically about Future Fuels cooperation with a Chinese company that bringing a Chinese technology here to the States for IGCC. I'm not going to say more. It's like a movie trailer. You got to go see the film, okay? But actually kicking us off today to kind of step back and maybe give us a slightly bigger context of the policy wranglings and important significance of U.S.-China clean technology cooperation and the green tech market as a whole. We've got Julian Wang, buddy here in town. Really pleased when he moved over here from Beijing. He's a senior policy analyst with the Energy Opportunity Team at Center for American Progress, and he focuses mainly on domestic and international climate and energy issues. And but he was kind of like a bum in Asia for a while. He did that Fulbright thing, and he started this. If you guys don't go to the blog, you need to go to the blog, The Green Leap Forward. It's really, that's how I found you. See, I did find you before you even found us. It's a great blog looking at China's energy and environmental issues, and he's also very much a matchmaker. And if you want to mention your beer and cheers stuff later on, that's fine as well. But okay, we're going to kick it off here because you've heard enough from me. And so, Julian, you want to start us off?
Sure. Great.
And you could speak from there.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jennifer, for the kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. Taking your time. So after this busy day, potentially very important day, as the Kerry Lieberman bill gets released later this afternoon. And I think there's going to be some relevance to, I personally will be looking forward to the kinds of provisions on international collaboration, the kinds of provisions that we sort of saw in the Waxman-Markey bill, and to see, to what extent that these show up in this new bill. and the kind of commitments that the drafters have in mind. I think it's going to be terribly important. Our relationship, the U.S. relationship with China, particularly with respect to science and technology, particularly energy technology, has changed very dramatically in the past few years. And now it's no longer the case that the U.S.-China relationship in energy technology is one way, but most certainly, both partners are sort of seen as coming to the table as equal partners, with both sides putting real money and co-developing technologies. So, I'm really looking forward to hearing my fellow panelists speak today about, specifically on coal, cleaner coal technologies. They are really the true experts on this matter. My goal today is really just to set some context on science and technology innovation policy in China that has brought China to where it is today, and is basically the foundation for where it will be in the years to come. So I will talk about the role of science and technology in the development history of China, briefly describe the parameters of the current state of innovation policy in China. Next, identify certain challenges that the Chinese will have to overcome if it truly wants to be an innovative society, particularly in energy technology, sustainable energy technologies. And then finally conclude with the thesis that it's going to be absolutely crucial that each side, or basically every country in the world, not just try to do it alone, and that there's a very important role for international collaboration. So I'll start off with a quote by Premier Wen Jiabao. He made this last September at the World Economic Forum. And since then, many members of the top leadership have said some variation of this, pounding the message home, and it's something that I sort of see as a renewed emphasis. And it goes something like this: we should see scientific and technological innovation as an important pillar and make greater effort to develop new industries of strategic importance. Science and technology is a powerful engine of economic growth. We will make China a country of innovation. We will accelerate the development of a low-carbon economy and green economy so as to gain an advantageous position in international industrial competition. Now, the quote in itself isn't, necessarily very surprising or very new. For any history buff, China history buff, China used to be, you would know that China used to be the cradle of innovation. It did, after all, invent the compass, the paper, the printing process, gunpowder. And in more recent Chinese history, particularly we talk about the late 70s with the opening up and reform of the PRC, science and technology was identified as one of the 4 modernizations movements. And now if you talk about science and technology as a modernization movement and this new emerging imperative for sustainable development, you sort of arrive, that provides the context for arriving at Hu Jintao's concept of scientific development. When talking about innovation, we tend to treat it with a very, broad brush, innovation, coming up with new inventions, new patents. But I think it's important to sort of distinguish that there are different kinds of innovation. And without going into too much detail in business theory on innovation, I think I would just raise a simple distinction, and one that and the distinction that really provides a deeper understanding of how the Chinese approach to innovation generally differs from the U.S. This is in broad strokes. Obviously, there are variations, but the classic Chinese innovation model has been one of import, assimilation, and then re-innovation, and as a result, the innovation tends to be more incremental in nature, improving upon existing technologies, tweaking it, adapting it to local conditions, and coming up with something slightly new, and a constant iteration of that process. And it's done it to great advantage. It's taken advantage of taking in foreign technologies. If you look at various sectors, the auto sector, the telecommunications sector, and now certainly the energy technology sector, you sort of start off with a receptiveness to foreign technologies. But the backdrop, there's always this sort of inclination for self-sufficiency and to build domestic capacity. And so at a certain point, after using the technology for a certain while, there's and tweaking it, there's a desire then to start producing these technologies as if it were their own. I think one good example, and I think when we think of innovation in the United States, we tend to think more of radical innovation. There certainly is evolutionary and incremental innovation, but also I think there's a strong emphasis for creating fundamentally new systems and new things. And I think there's no better example in the energy space than the solar PV space. In the mid-'90s, you saw a flurry of Chinese companies come to the United States to list their shares on U.S. stock exchange markets. And these have become some of the biggest producers of solar PVs in the world: Suntech, Yingli, JA Solar, and so forth. And these are the sort of like the top tier of Chinese solar panel makers. They focus more on crystalline technologies, relatively more mature technologies compared to other solar PV technologies. And their competitive position is really attributed to the ability to really perfect a manufacturing and assembly process in a very efficient manner. And it's not that the technology is fundamentally cutting edge, though these companies are also starting to invest a lot in R&D to develop new sorts of technologies. If you take a look at the leading edge companies in the solar space in the U.S., such as First Solar, Sun Power, Evergreen, and so forth. The emphasis is to find something that's fundamentally new and fundamentally different. So in First Solar's case, you have cadmium telluride thin films technologies. They're the only one in the world that seems to figure out how to do that in an economic way. Evergreen uses its own distinctive string ribbon technologies. So again, and you look at, if you track the venture capital money flows, you see that in the U.S. it has tend to gone to these companies that are on a more cutting edge of design and technology in thin films and so forth. Whereas money that's gone to Chinese companies has been towards more established sort of technologies and methods of doing things. But that said, I think times are changing. That the times for one-way technology transfer is over. China has already become a leading exporter of its own clean energy technologies. It has 40% of the solar PV market. It is becoming a big overseas developer of hydropower, of building dams and hydropower turbines. It's starting to exert its influence in high-speed rail, bidding for contracts in Turkey and Venezuela, and now they're interested in the California projects as well. Ultra-high voltage transmission wires is another sector where the Chinese have taken a leadership role, and in part that's driven by its domestic conditions. Vast geographical space, lots of remote areas, and the need to transfer electrons efficiently. And as we will hear later today, coal gasification. So going forward, or sort of like looking, I'll spend the next few minutes talking about what's in place today in terms of China's innovation strategy, and then subsequently talk about some of the challenges. I think if you just look at the sort of framework for R&D that exists, you do have some interesting elements that are in place. So you have, what is called the medium to long-term plan on science and technology, which really sets out the central government's vision for building a science and technology-based economy, an innovative economy. It identifies a number of benchmarks and a number of policies to stimulate R&D and to stimulate innovation. Some of these metrics include benchmarks for a number of patents generated by a certain time, aiming to be the top 5 or so in terms of generating patents. Another metric is the number of scientific publications that it generates. The Ministry of Science and Technology runs a whole host of R&D, science and technology funding programs. Some of the more famous ones are the 863 program for commercializing, for advanced research on soon-to-be commercialized technologies. And the 973 program is geared more towards fundamental basic research. And then you have other programs like the Key Technologies programs, the Spark program, Torch program, and so forth. The absolute amounts of these programs are not gigantic. I'll get to that in a moment. But they have been long-standing and they have been long-term, which is something. There's just more than can be said for the kinds of R&D programs that the United States has had. So that's certainly a distinction to be made. There's something like 53 or 54 national high-tech development zones scattered throughout China. These are, if you will, to make it easy to understand, science parks whereby you have a lot of high-tech companies clustered together. On top of those 53 or 4 or so national high-tech zones, you have another 50 or so economic development zones and a whole host of other provincial university-level science parks. So in all, I think it's something like 150 different types of 150 science parks of different types. So that, again, is going to be a base, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Albert, but I think the technology from TPRI, they are located in one such science park in Xi'an, if I'm not mistaken. And what you're seeing also is a increasing desire for multinational companies to locate their R&D facilities in China. A lot of this is driven by the market. Multinationals sort of perceive that the next big market for clean energy technology is going to be in China because of stable long-term policy. And as a result, you see the likes of Applied Materials setting up the biggest non-governmental solar R&D center in China, in Xi'an. You see DuPont doing similarly setting up one of their biggest, or perhaps their biggest, solar R&D center near Shanghai. Novozymes, a company that does biofuel research, set up its R&D headquarters in Beijing. And similarly, IBM has set up its R&D center for high-speed rail software technologies in Beijing. So by creating a market, that is how it's able to sort of stimulate innovation activity both at home and abroad. But challenges remain, obviously. And, I think it would still be a stretch to say that on an overall basis that Chinese technology has eclipsed U.S. technology. I think there's still a gap if you ask people in various sectors. Obviously, there are sectors where Chinese technology compete as well as any other. But by and large, I think there's probably some ways to go. So, I think in thinking in terms of, I had this conversation with Professor Bo Kong, who's sitting right there. And I think one of the things we talked about was China's approach to developing its clean energy technology sectors is to really focus on bringing costs down. So this relentless sort of approach, relentless efforts to bring costs down has sometimes many times come at the expense of quality. If you think about the way the wind technology market was started, and now the solar technology in terms of wind farms and solar farms, there's this bidding process for developers to set up, the lowest bid essentially would win the project. And so this, constant push for just rewarding the lowest bidder, and sometimes to the exclusion of considering any other factor, leads to a situation where corners are cut. So that sort of mentality has to shift, that sort of approach. And I think we're starting to see that. I think now in some of the sort of bidding processes, there's a sort of a weighted process to evaluating bids for clean energy projects, including the quality. So it's not just all costs. Absolute amounts of R&D in China remain small compared to other countries. I mentioned that the Ministry of Science and Technology runs a whole host of national programs, but if you add it all up and you add up private sector R&D, that only amounts to 1.5% of GDP. To put that in context, that number is 3% in the US and 4% in Japan. But that's going to change. The Chinese realize that if it wants to fulfill its 2020 vision in its medium to long-term science and technology plan, that it has to put in more money into R&D. They're aiming to ramp up that percentage to 2.5% by 2020. And it's obviously going to be a much bigger increase than those numbers suggest, because by 2020 its economy is going to be much larger than it is today. So 2.5% of a much larger share compared to 1.5% of today's share. In the private sector, R&D is still perceived as a cost rather than an investment. That mentality has to shift. I think part of the problem is that where you find the most innovative companies and the most dynamic and entrepreneurial companies, which are really the small and medium enterprises, those are the companies that have the least access to financing. So I think if that is one sort of aspect that has to be addressed, just making private sector financing to small, medium enterprises more accessible. And then you have other concerns that really impact stakeholders beyond its borders, and that have, in many cases, raised the ire of foreign trading partners. The Indigenous innovation set of policies, for instance. And to briefly summarize, the Indigenous innovation policies is basically a certification system that and the criteria is evolving. Partially it's a response to international pressure. But in a nutshell, it basically certifies companies that generate IP within China or have some sort of substantial Chinese ownership. And once you're certified as an indigenous innovator, so to speak, you are eligible for a lot of preferences, including, for instance, government procurement. And so the fact is that, the reason why foreign trading partners are up in arms is because the fact is that foreign firms are basically then effectively shut out of the process. The criteria are changing them at the margins. Just a few weeks ago, the Ministry of Science and Technology released a new set of criteria that it is responsive to some of these criticisms, and it's soliciting comments. So we'll see how that plays out. IPR concerns have been a long-standing concern. I don't think I really need to go too much into that, except to say that I do think that we are starting to see the central government sort of start to realize that it really needs to strengthen the enforcement of its already pretty good, pretty substantive IPR laws. Enforcement has always been a problem, not necessarily laws per se. And earlier this year at the Boa Forum in Hainan, Xi Jinping, who is perhaps the heir apparent to Hu Jintao's office in 2 years, made a very important reference to the need to strengthen IPR enforcement if it wants to transition to a green economy. So that's a hopeful hint. And I guess I'd just like to conclude, really, by sort of talking about emphasizing that, as China makes this push and as the U.S. tries to figure out its own strategy to develop its clean energy technologies, it's important that both countries realize that there's a lot to achieve by working together. This is going to be an enormous market, a $10 trillion market in 20 years, depending on which study you look at. It's going to be huge in any case, larger than any one country can ever invest in by itself. And there are lots of synergies, and we'll hear about that later after this. But I think that is important. I'm looking forward to seeing some important provisions in this afternoon's bill on that regard. And my final point is that technology is going to be important in transitioning to a low-carbon economy, but it's by no means the only thing that's going to get us there. Rather, technologies don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in context. Thinking about how we arrange these technologies, how they exist in a system, and how they're designed, and how infrastructure, which is really a system of different technologies, are built, is going to be very important. Similarly, beyond technology cooperation, I think market coordination and market access cooperation is going to be important, because you can build all these technologies, but you have to implement them. You have to set them on the ground so they can start reducing carbon and pollution. And finally, it's not just about the supply side, obviously. It's also about demand side. The way we use technology, the way we live and consume resources is going to be equally important. With that, thank you. I look forward to your questions later.
Okay, thanks. So I think you excellent laying of the land, broader context, and now we're going to get into the weeds. We're going to let Ming Song. Can you tell us about Clean Air Task Force?
Okay.
How you guys are? Yeah.
Well, thank you, Julian, for laying the, basically the foundation of where we doing our work. Because what Clean Air Task Force is a nonprofit NGO. What we're doing is that rather than, in order to clean up the air, we really need to put those people who has project needs, who have technology, those who have money, and those who have power and influence together to effectively execute the projects that effectively lower the emissions. And with that goal in mind, then we look at many different ways how can we do that, and we find that waiting for government to do that for us, it's a long way. So we try to put business to business, B2B connections to effectively do that. So, oops.
You hit stop. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. Oh, the one on the right. There you go.
Okay. So let me introduce a little bit about Clean Air Task Force. We are based in Houston, in Boston, Massachusetts, but we basically have offices all over. That's wherever we work and wherever we can impact that we go. The thing we feel we are ahead of the curve because we want to put B2B connections to effectively do things. So rather than wait, we move ahead and get things done. So we sponsor research, we sponsor innovation, and then we kind of like a matchmaker, get businesses to collaborate together, and then we do advocacy for government policies and so on. What for the air quality or the greenhouse gas itself, we feel the biggest issue is coal. Let's say United States generate half of their electricity from coal. China, it's about 80% of the electricity is from coal. Actually, the total energy for China, about 75% is from coal. And coal being the highest emitter of the greenhouse gases, so we want to try to people to use the clean coal technology first. And the key thing, what we have coined a term called CCUS, because normally we call CCS, carbon capture sequestration. China said, well, there is no reason to do anything with carbon dioxide you capture. What are you going to do? There's no price for it. So at the beginning of the year, we start advocate advocacy to the Chinese government and said, let's use CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and then sequestration. Sequestration is kind of like a last resort. And via facilitating a number of these CCUS projects, and Chinese have accepted the term CCUS. In fact, in August this year, we will have a first CCUS summit in Shanghai. So I think with the audience here, I don't need to reiterate the climate and energy challenge, what we're facing. We can't tell people, don't turn on your refrigerator, shut off your air conditioning, or turn off your TV. It just doesn't work that way. And all those things consume energy, and energy will have to come from some sources, and so we have a climate issue. We can talk about renewables. We do have a number, but for example, in China, the wind energy is growing 100% per year. I don't think you can grow any faster than that, because their grid, 30% is not connected to the grid because the grid can't handle. And we probably know China state grid is fastest building than anybody on earth. Collectively, nobody's building as much as state grid. Yet, 30% of the wind energy in China cannot connect to the grid because the capacity, many issues. The solar, Julian already talked about the solar. China is growing very fast. And hydro, the Three Gorges Dam, China's, huge projects. And can you grow any faster than that? Nuclear, they are constructing 12 nuclear power plants. In the United States, we haven't done one in 30 years. We really, in those, they really can't go any faster. The global community, they're doing as fast as they could. So coal is going to be with us the next, I would say, many, many decades to come. We just have to live with it. So the only way we can do it is to try to clean it up. So our hypothesis, in order to clean up coal, you need to gasify it first. Turn the coal into a gas, and then the gas, of course, we can handle chemical engineering very clean. And so that's the pre-combustion to, let's say, generate electricity. So we have IGCC, integrated gasification combined cycle, plus CCUS. So that would effectively have zero emission coal power plant. And I will talk about some specific examples that it's been done. The other way is, what do you do with the coal power plants that now exist? So we have post-combustion capture, and you take the CO2 from the smokestacks and do something with it. So both are being developed, and it's really, the technology is very available. We really need to demonstrate it commercially, and when you do it more commercially, you lower the cost, and then it becomes more effective. So rather than go through this global, I think for the audience here, the pathways, I won't go through this thing, but we understand that the energy and climate issues, it's tremendous challenge both for United States and China. And if these two really work together, we will have a better world. So what Clean Air Task Force does is trying to get business to business collaborate together to effectively do these things. So I want to talk about the key CCUS technologies and opportunities, then how we put those companies together, do the collaboration. I briefly talk about, the advanced coal gasification. You basically turn coal into gas, and then you clean up the gas. And I already talked about the IGCC is one-way gasification. It's the pre-combustion. And then for the conventional or existing power plants, you do the post-combustion capture. And if whatever you capture the carbon dioxide, the first we look at opportunity how to use it. For example, we put into Coca-Cola, champagne, dry ice. Anybody drinks decaffeinated coffee, it's extraction of the caffeine, use carbon dioxide. So there's many ways that we can use carbon dioxide, but the market is limited. The bigger one is enhanced oil recovery. We put the CO2 in and drive the oil out and leave the CO2 behind in the gap that it created. The last resort is what is here, geologic sequestration. So we put into geologic formation that's suitable for carbon dioxide storage. But really that storage is, we prefer to put in some of the saline aquifers. That's what we prefer. Saline aquifer will react with CO2 and it form carbonates. It's not going to come out very easily. So, so if we knew we do those things, geologic study properly, it's not going to be an issue. But in the U.S., there's a long-term liability. What if an earthquake, the CO2 comes out? Who owns the liability? It is an issue, but we have, in U.S., we have done that for decades. It hasn't happened. But still, we got to look at the liability, insurance, and so on. But in China, it's really one entity owns the liability, and if they allow it to be happen, it's not an issue. It's the Chinese government. They hold all the liability anyway. So I think we can really demonstrate that in China. It can be done quicker and cheaper, and the whole world will benefit if with that technology, the costs become lower. This is enhanced oil recovery as one of the utilization. In the U.S., we have done that for decades. China have not done EOR very much, and it's beginning to catch on. When I say begin, it's really started a couple months ago. We have the Chinese team here visit the United States, in Texas and Mississippi. That's where those things are done. And in fact, in North Dakota, we have gasification plant. The CO2, it's pipeline over to Canada to do that. So it's makes money. So China say, oh, it makes money. CO2 has use. Now we're talking. So China right now is really, the enterprises is profit driven. But of course, they have to cater to the central government. When Wen Jiabao and Hu Jintao talk about this is what we want to do, they will cater to that. But really, the net driver for business-to-business collaboration to do projects is how do we do it cheaper, faster, so that we can make more money. And all the IP rights and all the other things is really at the negotiation table. The businesses can get together, a lot can be accomplished. And I personally feel that's happening when I put the right partners together. They're doing a lot of good things. Here's some of the examples what China is doing on CCUS. I will talk about some of the examples, like Jennifer already talked about. I think you listed Duke Energy is the largest utility in North America. They're third in the U.S., but in the Americas, they're number one. Huanan Power is the largest in China. They just exceeded 100 gigawatts last year. A gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts. It's huge. They have partnered together. Duke has a IGCC plus CCS project in Edwardsport, Indiana. IGCC plus CCS is effectively a zero-emission coal power plant. Huanan Group is leading the GreenGen, as listed here. GreenGen is in Tianjin. Both projects are leading the world. They are roughly physically about 40% complete. And in fact, GreenGen is projected to start up next year. It's probably in United States we talk about FutureGen for about a decade, and it's still in the future, unfortunately.
Maybe they need a new name.
Well,
Now, Jen.
President Obama put another $1 billion in it. It's still in the future. So now, Edwardsport is codenamed NowGen. They are doing it, but it's a private industry that's doing it. So that's what Clean Air Task Force believes, that when you put private industry, if there's incentive, proper incentive, things will happen. And the GreenGen use a technology, gasification technology developed by TPRI. It's Thermal Power Research Institute. And Albert's going to talk about TPRI technology. Albert has eVaray, or Albert's company's group has eVaray, as one of the most efficient and lowest cost gasification technologies there is. And they're going to take the Chinese technology, do a project in the U.S. So I'm not going to steal Albert's thunder. So that's one example that it's happening. The other technology is listed here as ECAS, East China University for Science and Technology. Now, universities in China is a little bit different. They can do R&D and they go all the way to commercialization. Our university don't do that. We stop at D. Actually, we probably stop at R. And so many of our universities, we have very smart people, but we do research and for that's okay. But how do you take research into development and into commercialization? We hope national labs would do that, but they stop at D. So the real implementation, that it takes programs that U.S. Department of Energy, back in the days I was working in the 70s, when we had the energy crises, I went from ERDA to DOE under James Lessinger, we doing those programs. But as soon as the crisis is over, the funding disappeared. So we stopped. So many of those good technologies is stopped. And now we're picking it back up. We need to demonstrate it in China, and then we use it all over the world. I can talk about some examples like UGAS. Now, the company have bought the UGAS technology as SES, Synthetic Energy Systems, and they do that in China, demonstrate the technology, commercialize in China. Other technology, for example, Great Point Energy, they take the technology developed back in the 70s by Exxon. And now they're going to try to commercialize it. So a number of those things on and on. Post-combustion capture. Huanan Group, China's Huanan Group, have done a 3,000-ton unit in Beijing operated before Olympics. It's because Green Olympics. They want to demonstrate it, so they take the CO2 from one of the power plants in Beijing and capture the CO2. The CO2 is put in the Coca-Cola and the champagnes and so on. It's for food grade. So that technology has been operating since 2008. It works well. So they put that technology, expand it in Shanghai, because Shanghai has an expo started early May, and it's 120,000 ton unit. They take the CO2 from the two ultra supercritical power plants. Very, very ultra supercritical is very efficient power plants, and they take the CO2 and demonstrate it commercially in Shanghai. And I hope Secretary Chu, when his visit in 2 weeks, will visit that place. And effectively, if they have demonstrated technology is sound, cost is low, then potentially we can use that technology not only in China but in United States. We can use that to some of our plants here. A normal power plant emits about a million tons a year, or several million tons. And from 120,000 to a million tons, that's very straightforward scale up. And the cost will be even lower. And potentially, that particular post-combustion capture they're ready to build for the full commercial size. In fact, I know I'm helping. There's at least 5 commercial discussions. I can't talk about it because I signed a confidentiality agreement, but I know I'm helping them. It's working on that. And in fact, Future Fuels has a hands in it. And coal to liquid, Shenhua Group they're the only one do the coal to liquid because the cost is very high, but they also doing the CCS. They capture the carbon, and they're going to do the geologic sequestration in China. And many of our organizations, like Lawrence Livermore National Lab, has a hand in it, helping in that. The other one listed here is the ENN Group. It's a private industry. They're doing above-ground coal gasification, underground coal gasification. They take the CO2, feed into microalgae to turn into algae can be generates diesel and generates health products. So they are basically a closed-loop carbon self-sufficient, and that's the overall goal they're doing. And they also have solar. They take they license technology from Applied Materials that Julian talked about, and they build a plant in Langfang, and they partner with Duke Energy. Duke has the right to generate electricity on their customers' rooftops. So that solar panel will be supplied by ENN to Duke's customers. And in fact, it's going to work well enough that ENN will build a plant in the United States. They're very confident with their technology, their improved technology from Applied Materials, their management, and operating in United States will have as effective a cost-effective product as anybody. They are willing to compete with anybody in United States. So again, that's an example that the job is really created in United States, and they're going to headquarter in North Carolina. The governor of North Carolina went over to Langfang, and she really loved it. And they're going to, now, it's still in negotiation, but I think since newspaper have reported that, I can talk about it. Clean Air Task Force is right in the midst of this kind of things and putting these things together. I won't talk about the enhanced oil recovery because it's number of things. It's in discussion. The geologic knowledge and so on really is a big oil, and we really need to put the big oils work together. And right now, their focus is on the BP stuff. Yeah. So, and then that's not the focus. And the other CO2 source is readily is from ammonia plants. Ammonia plants in China does not have much natural gas, so they use coal to gasify it, and then they make ammonia of it. And CO2 is already captured. So it's a kind of free source. If we find a way to use that CO2 or sequester it, then we'll be a lot better off. So the U.S.-China partnership, I have talked about some of those. These, I've just related the previous slide that related from coal. There's a number of these opportunities. And when you have somebody like Duke and Huanan work together, they're very large energy companies. There are many others: solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, all those come into play. So even though the initial focus was on coal, but all these broadcast into different things. And energy companies between the U.S. and China, if they work together, effectively they can do the project quicker, faster, and probably lower the cost anywhere from 1/3 to, I would say, 100%. Now, the 100% meaning it's really it's a half, cut the cost in more than half. And that's very, very good for the business people to look at, and they can make more money, bigger bonuses. So that's the very, very high incentive. So coal gasification, we can talk about, the strong technology, it traditionally is from Shell, GE, Texaco. But now, I already talked about TPRI and East China universities. They have competitive technology. There's many others, new ones coming in. And really the place, even some of them invented in the U.S., they really need to demonstrate it. And the best place to do it is in China because you can do it cheaper and faster. And then that technology is proven, then you can use it in the rest of the world. And as far as geologic sequestration, U.S. really holds the edge on the knowledge because we did nuclear underground tests. So if you do nuclear tests, you better know your geology. Otherwise, we are not living to prove for the mistakes. So we have a lot of knowledge in that. And enhanced oil recovery, I already talked about, that we have been doing it for decades. And China is beginning to learn. So these are the things that we can cross each other and work together. If benefit the businesses because they will make money, but effectively it benefits the world because we remove these pollutants into use and lower the emissions. So it's a win-win-win all over, and I wish our government would more focus on DOE money and other. We have Asia-Pacific Partnership, that kind of money funnel into these, what I consider it's good demonstration of the technology and commercial support these, rather than just keep. Now, we still need to do R&D, but don't put 100% of money in R&D. We do R&D forever, and nothing commercial come out of it. I'm a doer rather than a dreamer. I do have dreams, but I want to make dreams happen. So that's what I would like to talk about. And what we do, Clean Air Task Force, is facilitate these things from into reality. It is a dream, but we want to make into reality. So I already talked about some of these projects. We also touch upon the policy to work with legislatures. We want government provide the level playing grounds, consistent policy, so the industries can make money and can effectively do good projects that meets the criteria that we want to set for. And Clean Air Task Force, I have to say, like Jonathan, half our staff probably is more legal related, and we don't mind suing somebody if they don't do it right. And so we do have a carrot and stick approach, but we doing the carrot approach first. We please do these. We will come in and help you. We being nonprofit, we do not charge. In fact, we do not accept funding from government nor businesses. So we like to see good things actually happen. We work beneath. For example, the partnerships we together, I sit through with many of them all the way in negotiations, and I will abide by confidentiality agreement. So it's effectively helping business achieve what they want to do. And, of course, always in the back of the mind, we don't mind go to public, go to court if you don't really do what you ought to do according to our law. So we also help R&D, and we help industries, and we really put international collaboration together. So my focus is Asia, but it's really the clean energy, especially clean coal. There is no boundaries, and any of the emissions into the atmosphere, it's global. We have the Iceland incident. Those pollutants doesn't say, oh, there's a border patrol, and they don't. It goes all over. And I think Arnold Schwarzenegger have said that his departments have proved that 25% of the pollutants in California originates from China. So California is very active working with China, said, well, please, let's help each other so that I don't have to suffer as much. So Clean Air Task Force also worked with Wilson Sonsini and Duke and others, form a Asia Clean Coal Initiative. Now we call it Asia Clean Energy Initiative, to effectively have executive roundtables, put the companies together, and I think Albert have been to a number of them. So a number of people here has attended some of those, and many of the partnerships as a result of that. We do have a web page. You're welcome to go through that. I think we going. The new one is called Asia Clean Energy and Innovation Initiative, and so these are some of the people we have put together. You see the KBR sign as KBR and Southern Company. They have a gasification technology called, it's in Wilsonville, Alabama, and we help them to license that technology to Dongguan in southern part of China for IGCC. So that's, technology flows both ways, and we already have seen the TPRI flowing into United States, into future fuels, and Duke and Huanan working together, and ZEEP, it's Rocketdyne, Pratt & Whitney. They have a very innovative gasification technology based on rocket technology, and they couldn't find a place to prove that technology, so we connect them with ENN. They're going to try to prove that concept in China. They have looked all over the world, and the only place you can do it quickly is China. So I won't go through all the things as I was talking. I think we have done, we have touched upon a number of these, the ZEEP, the Southern Company, the Duke Energy, ENN, and Bright Source, of course, is the solar, and they use the solar thermal technology, and we are helping them to commercialize in China, because Wenjiabao has already, and China have a very aggressive goal of having 12% of the electrical power to be generated by 2020 from non-fossil fuel. And, for example, Huanan is 100 gigawatts. 12% of 100 gigawatts, that's 12 gigawatts. And we think about 12 gigawatts, 2 gigawatt of solar or wind, it's huge. And how do we get there? So these are the things, the challenges. When you actually get to numbers, it's really very, very, very aggressive goal. And in China, I already alluded to, when the top leaders said, "Thou shalt do it," since most of them are state-owned enterprise, they better do it. Otherwise, the leadership would change. And that's not very funny for their career. And we talk about Duke Energy and Huanan Group, future fuels that Albert's going to touch upon. And so these are the ones that we can go public with. There's many we're still working that the companies are not ready to talk about. It's confidential, but I can, we are very, very active to effectively put business to business together, and opportunities are very, very large. And I can't work on all of them, but I think the opportunities are very large. And I've been trying to get many NGOs like NDRCs and working together with us so we can more effectively leverage each other to help these things for those who believes that we ought to do things, because we do not just protest and tell people to stop. We trying to encourage them to do it, but you please do it right, clean it up effectively. Right. So I think that's all I have. And here's the contact information if you want to contact some of us.
And this information is going to be on the website.
Here.
So, yeah, and there's Jonathan. Wave your hand again so you can be tackled afterwards. But, yeah, well, this is great. Well, let's applause for this man. And, of course, those of you that know me, I'm like, my radar's up. Ooh, future partnerships. So, we'll be able to drag Clean Air Task Force and your other future business partners together. And now we've got Albert. You're gonna stand. That's good.
Yeah, I'm going to stand here because I want to. I'll use the laser pointer and point out a couple things. But I really want to thank Ming Sung for being here. I don't think we should underestimate his role. He is truly a rock star, just like Mick Jagger is in the popular world. We call him Ming Jagger in the energy world. When it comes to U.S.-China relationships, he is a rock star. Thank you very much for everything you've done and Clean Air Task Force has done in this industry for the world. I'm also very encouraged to see so many young people in the audience taking an interest in energy. It's generally been looked upon as an old, stodgy industry, and it wasn't attracting a lot of young, energetic people, but I'm very encouraged that every time I come out with the passing of time, it gets better and better. And I assume everyone on the webcast is equally beautiful and young as the people in this room. Now, if you think back in the 1990s, the most popular book was called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 7 years. How in the world could this book be so popular and have so many people so long wanting to know what its contents were about? And I think it's fairly simple. It's talking about the complexity of a relationship that is so important for your personal fulfillment and enjoyment and for the continuation of the species that people were forced to be interested. Now, with that context, that's how I look at U.S.-Sino relationships in energy. The United States is a country that has become the largest economic power in the world, and it was run and built by lawyers. Nothing judgmental about that. That's just a fact. If you look at our lawmakers and policymakers, almost all of them have a background in law. China is the world's second largest economy now. It is built by engineers. Two seemingly very, very different bedfellows. How do you have a relationship when the world seems so different? And I say it's going to happen because, one, it will be fun and beneficial, and two, because it's critical for the sake of this planet. All right, I'm going to tell you now a little bit about the story of future fuels and how we got here. And as a general summary or overview of the backdrop, I would say I looked at it at 3 stages. One is we had to look and make a decision on whether or not we wanted to accept climate change as real. Now, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a climatologist, but since I live in California, I get to pretend that I'm one. But the reality is I think the science is pretty overwhelming, and whether you buy into climate change on a scientific level or a political level, I think that's the table stakes to get in on whether or not you really want to look at a relationship between the U.S. and China when it comes to energy. The second thing is we had to deeply examine the markets. And like Ming Sung said, we had to look at not just the R and the D, but the commercialization and ask, how is the world really going to address this in a practical matter so that we get results as opposed to a lot of interesting thinking and then later look back years from now and wish we did more. Last but not least is, can we actually start doing some things, some plans and solutions that will work in the marketplace and have an impact on the world? And we think the answer is yes, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll agree. At the crux of our challenge, this slide simply shows global population growth. When I was born, the world was preparing for an outrageous 4 billion population. Well, today we're at 7 billion, way beyond the forecasts. And we can accredit all the great philanthropy groups and improvements in technology and healthcare and everything else for allowing so many people to be on this planet. But the reality is it will change how we live, because 7 billion people on this planet is going to have a very different effect on how we live than 4 billion, and most governments will not address population control. So we have to accept that as a reality, and I think move on and say, now what can we do knowing that there's going to be 7 billion growing likely to 9 or 10 billion? Other market realities that come into fact when we look at this is that, like the title says of this discussion, coal is king, and that coal is entrenched and growing. I know a lot of people like to think of it as a 19th century technology, but it's really a 21st century technology because it's more popular now than it was in the 19th century. There are also high pressure from various, and I'll touch on some of these, various different parties to make coal cleaner, not just in China and the U.S., but really around the world. And also, I think when you look at just the China and the U.S., both countries possess the necessary skills at various levels between them to really make a substantial improvement in how good we can make coal as an energy source. Now, I'm showing a slide here that I think everyone has seen some version of, and that's just general energy usage in the world. And one of the things that I'd like to point out is that despite all the pressure and desire for so many to get off of coal, the reality is coal as a percentage of energy is rising. And it is rising during a time when the world's economy is generally recessed. So unless you think we're going to be depressed and recessed for a long, long time, we have to face the reality that coal as an energy source is growing as a percentage of the energy mix worldwide. My next slide kind of points out the difference of the rest of the world with the U.S. If you look at the U.S. forecast from the EIA, the United States is not going to grow that much in its coal use between last data 2007 and the year 2030. But look at what is expected of China, and actually they're on a trajectory to surpass that, and look at the total world number. And that's the reality of why we have to address coal as an energy source. This next slide shows you all the different plants that are in production using coal for energy. And in particular, these are basically electricity plants. And there is not a single competitive or modern economy or country in the world that does not have a good, reliable electricity system. And if you look at what is being planned, you will notice that the U.S. stands at about 14 gigawatts, which pales in comparison to India, which is 69, and China, which is 79. So 5 or 6 times the rate of U.S. Construction, and that's going on right now to come online by 2015. Now, this next chart shows you where the U.S. power plants are in generating electricity. Now, my goal here is not to show you how many lines and bars and small fonts can fit on it. You only have to take away the fact that 85% of the U.S. plants are older than 20 years of age, and that 50% are over 40 years old. Now, why do we care about that stat? We care about that stat because if China knows that a 40 or 50-year-old plant can still run, and they are building 79 gigawatts of brand new plant, how long do you think they plan to operate it? At least 50 years. So they're not going to get off coal for at least 50 years. And that's the reality of the situation that we face. Now, coal is unique because there's really only 2 large markets for coal. One is to make electricity, but the other is to make steel. And the technology of making steel has not changed that dramatically that people can get off of coal for making steel, but the industry and the demand for steel is changing rapidly. So I think everyone here probably knows that coal is used to make steel. What a lot of people do not know is that China has surpassed the U.S. in 2009 as the largest car market. Now, the auto industry will tell you that figure doesn't count because the value of the Chinese market is so much lower. I'll accept that, and that's fine. My point is the tonnage of steel to make more cars in China every single year than the U.S. is going to also continue the existence and the use of coal for a very long time. Just like these power plants that are expected to last 50 years, if the average life of a U.S. car is 9 years, I'll bet you the Chinese can make it last 15 or 20. They are going to find ways to not only use these vehicles that they're purchasing at 15 to 20 million a year, but they are going to build the requisite infrastructure to support all those automobiles. And I think that's worth paying attention to. Even mass transit. D.C. has one of the best mass transit systems in the U.S., highly rated, the metro. Shanghai is building 3 entire D.C. metros right now. That's a lot of steel. That's a lot of power. Okay, now some people are under the idea that China maybe is just unaware or doesn't care about the ramifications of all this power demand and what might happen with pollution. And I would say that's patently false. We spent certainly enough time over the last few years to know a couple of things, that China is well aware of the trade-offs of making coal cleaner. And I just want to identify and highlight a few of the things that I think are important and are topical in their mind. First is they know that working against clean coal are things like a very large population. People want energy and they want it inexpensively, and so the cost of power is important and the availability to a large population is important. And they also know, as Ming has touched upon, that even though there are plenty of laws in China, it's very hard to enforce it. And enforcement of those laws also create a business issue of the ability to comply. If you want to make something cleaner, the enforcement and ability to pull through on that also makes it difficult. But on the other hand, they are heavily attracted by the business opportunity. You heard Julian talk about this as a $1 trillion industry. It is. The slide I showed you of just what's being built is worth trillions of dollars. The energy independence and aspects that all sovereign nations deal with comes into play. And certainly, as China's wealth grows, the demand by the productive portions of society on improvements in life expectancy and their general level of health is also playing a role in this. Now, I want to talk about some of the natural aspects that attract the U.S. and China for doing business with each other. I think the U.S., despite what everyone reads in the popular press, is still the world's leading hotbed of innovation. Faster, more game-changing technologies still come out of the U.S. as a whole than probably any other market still today. When it comes to CO2 technologies, the U.S. actually has quite a lot. But like Ming pointed out, a lot of it's in the R and the R&D stage, and we need to move it to the commercialization phase. The U.S. has a tremendous rule of law, and we should not underestimate that, because that's what allows businesses to move quickly. When you have a framework and a platform you can trust, that allows business to be done quickly. And of course, the U.S., without a doubt, is still the world dominant power in marketing. Nobody knows how to sell or spin a story like the U.S. and create demand, and that's still true today. Now, China, what are they really known for? They are known for this dogged, incredibly good incremental improvement model. They have been very, very good in the last 10, 20 years of making steady progress in commercialization, engineering, moving up the value chain. The other thing that is specific to our industry is they're one of the few countries that without stop has invested very heavily in turning coal into other forms of energy. And that's just out of necessity. China has a lot of coal and not a lot of other natural resources for energy. They also have low costs, and this is brought up a lot, but it is true. China is one of the best places to get competent work done at incredible prices. Last but not least, and is also very important, China's attractiveness, they have a long-term horizon. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, but right now in energy, where things do take time, and when it comes to power projects, having a long-term horizon, I think, is serving the Chinese very well. And now the last column just talks a little bit about some mutual attractions. Both of our countries have tremendous coal resources, and I think that's obvious to anyone who's looking at the energy markets. So we have a natural tendency and a competitive advantage to work on coal. Second is we have a great transportation infrastructure. Both countries know how to move things around the world, and we should not underestimate how powerful that is as a business tool. And last but not least, in the mutual column is we have an economic codependency that for most people, if you study it, is absolutely scary. China funds our national debt to allow us to continue borrowing at very low rates so we can continue to buy Chinese products. If we break that cycle, I think the results could be pretty cataclysmic. Both countries have huge incentive to at least continue, if not expand, that relationship. Now, what about points of friction? Well, here are a couple that we've noticed that we think anyone that wants to do business must address. One is the United States controls the world's oceans. Now, that may seem like a funny statement, but the reality is if you're the world's largest exporter of goods and most of it leaves by ocean, it's a little bothersome that nothing can move from one country to another overseas without the implicit consent of the United States Navy. Our satellites, our ships, In fact, no one else really is building a Navy. And if you look at the policy of the U.S., it's generally been a good policy to say everyone can ship freely on the sea lanes, just don't build a war-based marine fleet. Because guess what? The U.S. is patrolling it all for you. Well, I think that could be a little a little difficult as we continue down our relationship, and that's why I think you hear all these reports of China building their own Navy. But that's one issue in the background to keep track of. The other thing is, I don't want to spend too much time on some of these, but the long education cycle is a huge advantage for the U.S. The U.S. is used to investing in its youth for a long period of time. Most people cannot be economic positive contributors to the economy in the U.S. until they're well into their early 20s. Because they go through a schooling process and a socialization process that is long, but then they enter the world's largest economy and they're productive for a period of time. And the Chinese are actually facing a period of time of transition where they are faced with the reality that every one of their productive people will have to be schooled longer. So if they don't address things like healthcare and life expectancy, the productive period of time that these people will have for their economy is shrinking. Now, I don't want to be too clinical about this, but that's a reality of productive and competitive advantage that matters when countries compete with each other or other countries in the world. And here, I think the U.S. does have a big advantage because we've already made that transition. In the old days, the more kids you had, the better off you were economically. By the time they were teenagers, they could be economically productive. Today, if you follow that model, it's pretty much a ticket to poverty. You will not be net generating economic gain. Our military presence, I think it goes without saying the U.S. is very active around the world militarily. China really is not. That, I think, is a point of friction. And last but not least, in the U.S. column here is our unpredictable policies, and that's based on 4-year election cycles and all sorts of things, the way we fund and capitalize companies in the public market, etc. Now, in China, I think their points of friction and some of the things they take the view that they are a recent carbon emitter. Yes, they're the biggest carbon emitter, but they feel like they're inheriting a global problem created by a lot of others who enjoy the good times, and now they're asked to pay for the cleanup. The other aspect is what Ming talked about with IP protection, and Julian talked about it too. I sure hope they're serious about it because that is a big issue. It's one thing to write a bunch of laws and put them on the books. It's another to enforce them. The huge population will naturally force different decisions. China's population density, and despite the fact that their economy is large, their per capita resources are still de minimis compared to the U.S., so you can't ask them to look at the same problems and come up with the same solutions. It's just not going to happen. And one other point of friction is generally people view the Chinese policies as somewhat inflexible. Sometimes it's good that they stick to the game plan, but sometimes it's bad because they stick to it long after it remains effective. Now, how does that boil down to our solution? Well, what we have done is we've taken what we think are some of the best U.S. traits, our ability to market and develop projects, especially in complicated business systems. And I'm talking about when you look at the energy industry in the West, you are accountable to things like regulatory commissions, shareholders, all sorts of bodies that would have penalties if you fail to perform. In China, when you are the government and the power company, generally there are not a lot of ramifications for any mistakes. And that translates into a totally different relationship and skill set. So for us, we bring to the table a tremendous ability to develop projects and to sort of, quote, westernize the technology, make it presentable, translate it to the right building codes, develop and support all the right post-sale support that you would expect and utilities demand and need. And what they supply is their tremendous investment, over $400 million US. We estimate that if a Western company were to try to replicate their investment just in gasification, it would be about $4 to $5 billion US dollars. Their engineering skills, which are tremendous, and their construction, their capability to build these kind of complex industrial products at a very competitive price. Now, I have to add a portion about the other parties that get involved, because just because our primary partners happen to be in China does not mean we can pull off this solution without other people in other countries helping us. Now, so what have we done? Well, I'll give you one example. That's the one Ming showed in his slide, and that's our Good Spring gasification project. Now, this is in eastern Pennsylvania. It's probably close to Scranton as the closest major city in that area. It's a 270 megawatt coal-based gasification electricity plant that has the capability of fully sequestering 90+% of its CO2. This was permitted in April of this year. And after it took about 2 years to permit, and actually I looked back, and that's about a record. The U.S. definitely, as others have pointed out, is not moving that quickly, but 2 years is about an all-time record for a 100 megawatt or larger power plant using coal. We chose Pennsylvania for a lot of reasons. If you're interested in why, I'll take that in the Q&A. But this project is permitted, and you can see that TPRI is the technology supplier, so the exact same technology as GreenGen with a lot of improvements. Because GreenGen, even though it's about to turn on, the actual design is about 4 or 5 years old. It has continually, like I pointed out with the slide of Chinese attractiveness, incrementally improved every single year for 5 years. So our version is even better, and they're excited about it, and so are we. This is a satellite view of the actual site. I want to point out a couple things that are unique about this site. One is that it's located on or adjacent to a fully permitted coal mine. So we have our own controlled cost and source that has no transportation cost. If you ever study the coal market in the U.S., you know that Wyoming and Dakotas and other places spend 2 to 3 times the cost of the coal just to transport it to a market that needs it, like in the Midwest or the East Coast. So we have no transportation cost. We also are right next to the PJM. If you look at the satellite photo down here, this is a very large interconnection to the PJM West grid, which is the largest electricity grid in the United States. That means we don't have the cost of transmission that is commonly associated or even plaguing many projects like in the wind world. And those savings, no transportation costs, control over our coal and feedstock, plus very low interconnection fees and lack of transmission line cost allow us to pay in part for the CO2 handling, which, of course, as everyone knows, is not free. So I want to finish on the fact that even Secretary Chu continues to state the obvious. 2 weeks ago, he testified, and he said, for the sake of our economy and our security and our environment, America must develop decisive policies that will allow us not only to compete in the clean energy race, but to become a leader in providing clean energy technology to the world. We wholeheartedly believe that. We think that statement was true 3 or 4 years ago when we got started. It's certainly true today. And with that, I'll be happy to take your questions.
Okay, good. All right. So you guys should understand up here that this is, this is a DC audience, but I think it's important that we're starting to understand the technology, right? Policy people need to know technology. We've got, Nick, you want to come get this? We're going to ask questions, but do speak into the mic. Hands up. And make sure you say, Ada, how about right up here? Actually, I could pass it to him here. Make sure you say your name and affiliation. I gave it to him already.
Hershey, I'm a consultant.
Oh, wait. I was a doofus and didn't turn it on.
Oh, okay.
No, you can't shout and make the technology work without. All right.
Okay. Are there any ranges of cost estimated for what the electric power will cost from the Pennsylvania plant that you mentioned?
Right now, it's heavily dependent on how much CO2 you want to sequester and how fast, but it's in the range of 10 to 12 cents per kilowatt. So it's definitely more than if you just had a traditional old-fashioned coal boiler.
Okay.
I'm Fran Dabrowski. I'm an environmental attorney, and I used to be an assistant attorney general for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I'm curious. You said if you in the Q&A you'd go into why you picked Pennsylvania. I'd like to know.
Well, okay then. Thanks for the question. And we picked Pennsylvania because, one, they were forward enough looking to have an alternative energy portfolio standard, which helps set some of the groundwork for the incentives that I think are necessary for this kind of a project to attract private investment capital. We also chose Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania is a pragmatic state that is looking for jobs. This would create a lot of jobs. And we also picked it because the location is good. I mentioned a few of the aspects about the PJM interconnection being there. And you're in a market with high electricity prices, so there is demand for more electricity. But there were some other things behind the scenes that really attracted us to it. And one is the work of the Clinton Foundation, which has been tremendously helpful in pushing forward the idea of a CO2 network. And that's the idea of a network of pipes that can take any utility CO2 and move it to an appropriate geological site. Because one of the problems in the industry is if you are a utility and you're not blessed by picking a good location 30, 40, 50 years ago, you are going to spend your time lobbying against moving any of this forward because it's nothing but a high-cost item with a lot of risk and liability. So the idea of Pennsylvania being forward enough to look at the idea of a carbon dioxide pipeline network that would use states' right-of-ways and things like that was also very attractive. Last but not least, it's located in the Marcellus Shale. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's certainly one of the largest natural gas fields in the U.S., and it has the kind of geology that is favorable for either enhanced natural gas recovery potentially or sequestration. So those are kind of the highlights of why we picked it. Not to mention a lot of great governmental support all the way around.
Kind of sounds like the points that Julian made at the beginning, that it's not just the technology. You need this kind of this combo. Okay, some other questions? I had a hand in the far back, and then come back to the table. And maybe stand up so we can see you too. Yeah, thanks.
My name is Yuhan Zhang. I'm from Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And I have, thank you very much for your presentations. And I have 3 quick questions for each of you. For Mr. Julian Wang, I want to ask you because coupled with the misperceptions between the 2 countries and also the mistrust between the 2 governments, what do you think of the technology transfer, especially from the U.S. to China? And for Mr. Sun Ming, I want to ask you that although I hold the point that CUSS is very good or promising technology, and I believe that the bilateral collaboration would be very fruitful, I want to ask you, in the phase or the process of commercialization, do you think this technology is affordable? Because, in China, that country, based upon the per capita GDP, it is still a developing country. And for many leading scholars in the U.S., they think that the clean energy technologies, including the CUSS, would be very, very costly. And for Mr. Albolin, I want to ask you that because the world right now is depending on the coal, and it will continue to do so. However, the pessimistic souls, including the International Energy Agency and the World Bank, they think that the Chinese coal reserve can only be used for 42 years instead of the 40 years you mentioned, while the United States can be used for like more than 200 years. So compared with the CCS or other advanced coal technologies, what do you think of the other clean energy technologies? Thank you all.
It was a one-stop shop back there. All right, gentlemen. How about Julian?
Excellent set of questions. Thank you for that. So the question, my question was, in light of the up and down relationship between the U.S. and China, how is that going to impact technology transfer from the U.S. to China? I think the first thing to recognize is that that model of a unidirectional transfer technology is slowly fraying at the edges. and that there is now, as Ming Sun and Albert pointed out, plenty of opportunities for a bi-directional flow, or in fact, not just China to the U.S., but China, quite frankly, to many parts of the world. And so it's a changing and evolving perception that China has something to offer to the table too, that makes it very attractive for the U.S. to engage with China. Second, I would say that a lot of these technology transfers are a result of private sector activity and not so much a government-to-government sort of facilitated transfer. So, if you're in the shoes of a business or a private sector entity, you're not really concerned necessarily about a lot of the political, overarching government-to-government political relationships. You're just in there to sniff out a business opportunity and to return value to your shareholders. So your set of concerns are going to be a lot more limited and confined. Not to say that there aren't still existing tensions. I pointed out a few, including the Indigenous innovation policies and IPR as a start. But I think business people tend to be a lot more pragmatic about these things and try to work these things out. So I think the future is bright for technology transfer.
Well, in response to your question about CCUS, it's since what I've been helping commercial companies, they have only one goal in mind, is to make money. If you don't make money, they don't do the project. The example I talk about CCUS, for example, post-combustion capture for both the Beijing plant and the Shanghai plant. They're selling the CO2. There's a price for CO2, and they capture it, they're making it cheaper than what they're selling. They're making money on it. If they don't make money, they don't do it. Right now, because China has no subsidy for CO2. In United States, enhanced oil recovery, you pay for CO2. The pipeline the CO2 ships to the enhanced oil recovery site. Let's say, your cost of CO2 is $25, $30 a ton, and you make a barrel of oil, which right now is $80. I can count my money, $50 a barrel, net profit. I'll do it any day. So that's the type of things, that's why CCUS is important. When you're just talking about CCS, you just bury it underground, there's no other use, then China said, well, I don't want to do it until the world come up with a carbon price. But CCUS, I can put people with technology and needs together. They say, oh, I can make money. Then it turns them on.
Okay, on the question of China's coal reserves and the perpetuation and use of coal, I think when you look at the studies that have derated the longevity of coal, most of them assume two things. One, they assume that the build-out rate will continue. I don't think China's going to be building out at this rate forever. For the next few years, probably, but as they come online, let's all hope that they don't continue this rate. The second thing is, if you look historically at coal's efficiency rate, it has not changed a lot in the last 30 years. That is changing rapidly right now. So I think if you kind of mix in what China is experiencing with the latest generation of coal utilization and their efficiencies, plus the fact they're not going to be building at this rate forever, I think China has a little more reserves than most of these other estimates that predict it will run out, so to speak. The second thing goes back to my point about control over the oceans. China actually imports a lot of coal. They use all the coal they can get, and then they import almost everything Australia can make, and they even take 4 to 6 billion of coal from the U.S. I mean, think about it. The U.S. is shipping rocks to China at the tune of $6 billion a year, and it's profitable for all the parties, and they like it. Now, that's the reality, and I think that's how they'll perpetuate it.
Okay, Bo Kong, and then we'll do Bo Kong, and then here, and then I'm going to ask a question because I'm curious. Okay, go for it.
Jennifer, thank you for putting together this wonderful program, and thank all the panelists for this stimulating discussion and bringing in this cutting-edge knowledge on these issues. I have a couple questions and a comment, really. And just pick up where Dr. Song just left off regarding the competitiveness of these technologies. Based on my understanding, it seems to me that the power companies today in China are losing money, largely because of the coal lack of price liberalization in the coal market and not coal market, the electrical power market, and on top of that, if you compare IGCC technologies with other technologies, not to mention CCUS. To build one IGCC power plant, the production cost is at least $1,800 per kilowatt. And so that definitely pales, it's far less economically inferior to other ultra supercritical technologies, which takes a couple $100, less than close to $1,000. So that's one question. And then the second question I have in mind is, I know the cooperation has just begun. Some of the work is preliminary, but I wonder if Dr. Song, if you can comment on the lessons you have drawn from the cooperation, the bilateral cooperation in the private sector to reduce carbon emissions in China. And what are the lessons you have drawn from the cooperation, and what are the prospects for scaling up this cooperation? And for Albert, I was wondering if you can comment on the TPRI technology that you introduced to Good Spring. Can you comment on the maturity of this technology and its deployment in China? How widely has this technology been deployed in China? And how competitive is it in comparison with other clean coal technologies such as clean bed, CFB, circulating fluidized bed technology, which is really competitive and has good track record in taking out both NOx and SOx. And does this TPRI technology do a good job with regarding NOx and SOx? Thank you.
Excellent questions too. All right.
Well, let me respond to that. When you compare costs, you really need to have the same basis. The IGCC plus CCS, like the Green Gens or Edwards Port project, you're looking at from coal generating electricity with zero emission. Any other technology, if you put that stipulation as zero emission, zero CO2, there's nothing competitive. You're basically building an ultra supercritical plant plus post-combustion capture and sequestration linked to that. Compare with IGCC plus CCS. That is a true comparison. Then you will find the cost of IGCC plus CCS is lower. It's not fair to compare IGCC plus CCS just with the ultra supercritical or conventional coal power plants, because that's not a fair comparison. Now, if you're talking about IGCC itself without CCS, then a lot of people say, why do you want to gasify the coal if you don't care about the emissions? That is the issue. In China and United States, we care because I care about my future generation. My children, my grandchildren, I don't want them to suffer because we don't care. And we need to prepare for that, because a technology development cycle, it's decades, 10, 20 years. It's not overnight. So we need to put these technologies into commercial practice, demonstration. And the Green Gen is jointly done by the 5 Chinese Gencos, plus Zhenhua Coal, plus Peabody from United States. They chip in They do it. They want to demonstrate the technology, integrate the technology. U.S. was going to do it with future gen, but they put in, President Obama just put in another $1 billion. Future gen is still not even in the drawing board. They haven't even picked the technologies yet. But green gen is 40% complete in construction. They are doing it because they want to find out how much it costs, how is it integrated, numbers. A lot of people guess at the numbers. But not until you operate, you don't really know how much it is. And when they hope to prove that is better. But TPRI is jointly owned by the 5 Chinese gencos. They're not betting on only one technology. They're doing the post-combustion capture. They're doing the ultra-supercritical. So they are doing all these. So with a goal, they must clean up sooner or later. They need to clean up. They need to demonstrate the technology, not just in R&D, but as a commercial world, that really what are we talking about? Okay. Albert?
Okay, so real quickly, you asked about TPRI technology and the commercialization. And first, when we look at it, the current generation, what we call the 2-stage gasification process, that is what GreenGen is using and 2 other sites that are being built right now in China are using. Prior to that, I think everyone probably knows gasification as a chemistry, as a basic chemistry and technology. Has been around a long time. It's a 50-year-old technology that China, including TPRI and others, have commercialized for things like fertilizer and other fuels like diesel. When we look at why we want to partner up and focus on IGCC, it's because from a business standpoint, it gives you a lot of options. Because if the electricity market is not there, the technology still can take coal and turn it into other useful products. Whereas if you build a supercritical, you're pretty much stuck with one business model that you have to sort of optimize and live with. So I would just kind of throw that out there.
Okay, let's gather up 2 questions real quick out here in the white, and then pass the mic across the table. Well, if you can. You do your yoga pose, reaching it across.
Hi, I'm Xiaodong Wang from the World Bank. My first question is on the CCUS. We're working with CPI in China on the CCUS. I think on the one hand, like you said, it's a very innovative concept to change liability of CO2 to asset. On the other hand, the critique said CCU, also called CCUR, carbon capture, utilization, and release. Because when you talk about the Coca-Cola, now you have an example, and then you release the atmosphere, so you actually do not reduce CO2. So what's your view on that? And my second question is on this post-combustion versus pre-combustion. And there's a lot of talk and lots of demonstration on IGCC. But if you look at the China, you show that 80 gigawatt, probably more. The bulk of the newly built and also the existing are super critical. It's not nothing to do with IGCC, nothing to do with CCS. So let's say China by 2030 have a carbon target. By that time, in my view, the post-combustion will be taking into effect to retrofit all these existing ones will play a much larger role than the pre-combustion. So what is your view on that?
Okay, let me answer the first part, the CCUS. Indeed, if it's Coca-Cola, the CO2 is when I drink it, and eventually it does go to the atmosphere. But think about it. If I don't give up the Coke, CO2 is made on purpose. By a chemical process, it's generated. Okay? So X ton of CO2 is going to put in the Coca-Cola I'm going to consume. For the moment that I don't give up the Coca-Cola, that CO2 will go to the atmosphere. If I capture the CO2 from a power plant that was going up to the atmosphere, we take that, put in the CO2, then we push those people that you don't make CO2 on purpose for Coca-Cola. That's a net reduction. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. So if you take a bigger angle, yes, it is released, but I'm effectively eliminating those that generating CO2 on purpose for Coca-Cola, for the dry ice, for the Folgers, champagnes and so on. That's a net reduction. Yes, we can change consumer picture that, I give the story about if you don't drink Coke, then I don't need to release the CO2. And we don't, Albert talked about if we have population control, there's a lot of things, but we don't want to touch that because consumer, I'm not going to turn off my computer.
Touch my Coke, right?
I'm not going to turn off my computer. So those are lifestyles that we want to enjoy. We want to continue the lifestyle, and how do we effectively get lower? So that would be my answer. The other part, I think, you addressed to the other folks or target to me?
Who wants to grab her last one?
Yeah, what's left to be answered? You asked.
Yeah, saying that because China's already building all these plants, that post-combustion, maybe that's the market.
I can touch that. Those plants already built. If it's not like IGCC, like Albert's, then you don't pre-collect the CO2. Then you have to install the post-combustion capture later on. And post-combustion capture will cost you. And that's, when do we have a carbon price? I don't know. That's where the world going to discuss the Copenhagen. They're going to set a carbon price, I hope, sometime. And if there is a carbon price, then they got to do it. At this point, China said, well, there's no carbon price. Let me just build a conventional. They do want to increase the efficiency, so they use ultra-supercritical plants. But they're not capturing the carbon. It's go up this atmosphere. But sooner or later, we need to do something with it.
And Xiaodong, can you pass the mic over to Anne there? Get that nice stretch in. Good.
Hi, I'm Anne DeVera with Center for Climate Strategies, and thank you very much for a very rich discussion. As you know, China is putting in place in their next 5-year plans the carbon intensity targets of 40 to 45% by 2020. And can you comment on how effective you think it will be to actually spur this kind of technology and innovation in China?
Well, from my standpoint, I think China's heavily motivated by economic gain, and they view the next 20 or 30 years as a tremendous opportunity to commercialize the technologies that they've invested in that was focused on coal, I would say initially just in a self-serving energy independence kind of mindset. They now realize there is going to be a tremendous global demand for cleaner and better coal utilization. So my belief is that they do look at the opportunities now far beyond what just China can do and where they like to participate.
I think that the power of setting a national standard cannot be underestimated. I think if you look at what other countries have done, particularly in Europe, that national top economy-wide standard really sends a market signal to the private sector. In terms of China's specific target of 40 to 45%, very interesting study done by a former speaker at this very forum, Zhou Qi. Mm-hmm. His team at Renmin University has done a very good study, and they put that report out just last month, or maybe 2 months ago, looking at what the 40 to 45% target means in terms of a roadmap to get there, and what the technological solutions are. In a nutshell, they surveyed 388 technologies that they identified as required as part of an overall mix to get to that 40 to 45%. It's going to take between $30 to $50 billion per year of investment over the duration of the target period. And they also identified that there were 43 specific technologies that China just didn't have that sort of capacity or expertise, and is going to have to rely on a lot of ramped up R&D and international cooperation. So I think it is going to have a really powerful effect on technology innovation.
Okay, we're running out of time, so they'll be tackleable. But I want to see. I know like 4 Chinese idioms, and so I try to use them again and again, so I seem really fluent. And actually, because Albert, I was surprised. I was expecting you to throw it up there. That there was an expression that Tongchuan Yimong, which David Lampton used for his book on U.S.-China relations, same bed, different dreams. Right, and I think that a lot of times when you look at the U.S.-China tussling, even over the energy stuff, like what was that lovely thing last year with the Texas wind farm, and everyone they're getting all upset about it, and so it really seemed like that. Wow, we are linked, but we have these kind of different dreams. But I actually, I think we need to make up a new idiom, because in some ways, not to sound schmaltzy here, but what you guys are doing, with the clean energy cooperation, that it's same bed and there are same dreams. But on that, I have to ask one question: with you guys coming, bringing a Chinese technology to Pennsylvania, it sounds like you have local buy-in, but I've wondered if that whole Texas stuff, did that kind of, I see that as really scaring U.S. business. Is that the question you didn't want, or?
No. We actually get that question quite a lot. But the reality is, when you study the total solution, I think people are okay with it, because we, as a developer, we are open to any and all technologies. Before we had our formal relationship with TPRI, we were investigating a lot of different technologies from all the well-known names that are out there. We chose this because of its efficiency, and we had to essentially convince the Commonwealth that this is best overall, because the jobs stay there, the benefits stay there, and you get a much cleaner, lower cost solution, and that's how you end up with a win-win. So that's why we proceeded to go down the path we did.
That's excellent. Okay, we have to do it's 11, but you, again, applause for these wonderful people. And now that we've whetted your appetite on coal, right? Do note that on June 24th, we're going to have the head of FERC and a couple more California types, one of whom I think actually is a scientist, so he doesn't just pose for one on TV, that they're going to be talking about decarbonizing the power sector to really get into some of the nitty and gritty. And I really strongly encourage us all, because we need to get smarter here on DC and the actual stuff happening on the ground there. So that's June 24th. Before that, the week before, we've got nothing to do with it, well, kind of with energy, environmental justice activists in China, some of whom looking at issues of environmental justice in the climate energy sphere. There is a linkage. And June 30th, we're doing clean transport, BRT in Guangdong, 3rd largest in the world. All right. Thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you soon in June.
You talk about one Chinese saying.
I know my tones are terrible.
I'll give you another one.
Yeah?
Better.
Yeah?
It's Hongzhou Gongji.
Hongzhou Gongji.
We all in one boat.
Oh, yeah, that's another.